Show me the receipt." The voice was gravelly, laced with the kind of casual authority that required no uniform. It came from a man whose posture was a challenge, whose belly strained the fabric of a faded polo shirt. He had one hand on the door frame of his little shop, blocking her exit. His other hand was extended, not palm up in a request, but palm down, a gesture of command. The afternoon sun was hot on her neck. She could feel the weight of a dozen eyes from the quiet street, a mix of curiosity and practiced indifference. A few phones, she noted, were beginning to rise, small black mirrors angled to capture the unfolding scene. She stood perfectly still, her bag held loosely in one hand, a $2 bottle of water in the other. Her name was Imani Wallace, and she did not move. She did not flinch. She simply met the man's gaze. He took her stillness for defiance. "I said, show me the receipt for what's in your bag, or I'm calling the cops." What he didn't know was that he was already speaking to the law. What he couldn't possibly understand was that in grabbing the strap of her bag, a simple, aggressive tug, he hadn't just accosted a citizen. He had assaulted a federal agent, and he had just made a federal case out of a $2 bottle of water. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The first day of her leave had begun with silence. Not the oppressive silence of a stakeout or the charged silence of a briefing room, but the gentle, porous silence of her father's house. Imani Wallace, special agent with the Drug Enforcement Administration for 22 years, stood at the kitchen window and watched the sun climb over the sycamore trees that lined the long gravel driveway. 21 days of mandatory leave remaining. The number felt both impossibly long and mercifully short. After the last operation, a sprawling 9-month RICO case that had dismantled the cartel's entire East Coast distribution network, her hands still hummed with a phantom tension. Her mind still ran on timelines and contingencies. Her father, Judge Wallace, retired, moved with a quiet economy behind her, the scrape of a cast iron pan on the stove, the rich, earthy smell of coffee beans being ground. These were the sounds of her childhood, the sensory anchors that had held her steady through a life spent in the storm. He placed a heavy ceramic mug on the warm butcher block beside her. He didn't speak. He knew she needed the quiet to recalibrate, to let the hardened shell of her profession soften just enough. She wrapped her hands around the mug, feeling the warmth seep into her palms. That was the first thing she always noticed upon returning here. The textures, the smooth, cool granite of the windowsill, the rough grain of the wooden countertops her father had installed himself, the comforting weight of this specific mug. In her world, everything was tactical, disposable, sterile. Here, everything had history. "The garden's looking good this year," she said, her voice a little rough from disuse. Her father nodded, cracking eggs into the pan. They sizzled, a sound like gentle applause. "The soil is finely balanced. Took me 3 seasons. Some things just take time." It wasn't just about the soil. It was his philosophy for everything. Justice, healing, forgiveness. You couldn't rush them. You tended to the conditions, you were patient, and you trusted the process. Imani had inherited his patience, but her profession had demanded she weaponize it, turning it into a tool for watching, waiting, and trapping. Here, in this kitchen, it could just be patience again. She had 21 days to remember how to be Imani, not Agent Wallace, to unpack the vigilance that lived in her shoulders and the threat assessments that ticked behind her eyes. The department mandated it after high-stress, long-term assignments. They called it decompression. She called it learning to breathe without listening for footsteps behind her. After breakfast, her father pressed a small velvet-lined box into her hand. Inside was a simple silver locket, oval-shaped and polished to a soft gleam. It wasn't new. It had been her mother's. "I had it cleaned," he said. "Thought you might want to wear it while you're home." She lifted it from the box. It was cool and solid. She remembered her mother's hands, always smelling of lemon verbena and ink, fastening this very clasp. Inside, there was a tiny faded picture of her parents on their wedding day, and on the other side, a photo of a 5-year-old Imani, gap-toothed and beaming. It was a reminder of a life before the DEA, a life measured in scraped knees and summer vacations, not arrests and convictions. "Thank you, Papa," she said, her voice thick. "Dignity is our inheritance, Imani," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "It's the one thing no one can take from you unless you give it away." Your mother knew that. That locket is just a piece of metal. What it represents is what matters. She fastened it around her neck. The cool metal felt like an anchor against her skin. She spent the rest of the morning reading on the porch, the words blurring as she simply listened to the world wake up. The buzz of a bumblebee in the lavender bushes, the distant whine of a saw, the slow tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. She let herself feel the quiet for exactly 3 hours. Then the restlessness began to stir. The need for movement, the need for a destination, however small. "I'm going for a walk," she called out. "Into town." "Take my car if you want," he offered. "No, I need the steps." She needed to feel the ground under her feet to measure the distance in her own strides. It was a habit from years of surveillance, pacing out perimeters, knowing a location not from a map but from the soles of her shoes. The walk was just over 2 miles, along a winding country road where asphalt gave way to the town's old brick sidewalks. Northwood was a town caught between eras. Historic storefronts with proud, turn-of-the-century facades stood next to cheap, modern buildings. It was quaint from a distance, but up close, you could see the fraying edges. The sun was higher now, beating down with an insistent, humid heat. Her throat was dry. Up ahead, she saw a sign that read Renshaw's Provisions. It was a classic general store, its windows cluttered with a random assortment of goods. Fishing lures, dusty cans of soup, lottery signs, and a hand-painted placard advertising cold drinks. It would do. She pushed open the door, a small bell tinkling overhead. The air inside was cool and smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cardboard. A man stood behind the counter, the same man she would confront less than 10 minutes later, Mark Renshaw. He was watching a small television bolted to the wall, a daytime court show blaring. He didn't look up when she entered. Imani walked to the back, her footsteps quiet on the worn linoleum. She found the refrigerated section, a humming, fluorescent-lit cave. She pulled out a simple bottle of spring water. As she turned, she felt his eyes on her. It was a feeling she knew intimately, the heavy, speculative gaze of someone making a calculation. She had felt it from drug kingpins and informants, from dirty cops and street-level dealers. It was the look of someone sizing you up, not as a person, but as a problem or an opportunity. She walked to the counter and placed the bottle down. Beside it, she put a crisp $5 bill from her pocket. Renshaw's eyes flicked from her face, to the water, to the money, then back to her face. He didn't move. "Just the water," she said, her voice even. He slowly reached for the money. His movements exaggerated. He rang up the sale. The register drawer screeched open. He counted out her change, $3, and dropped it onto the counter, not into her waiting hand. The coins spun and settled. "Have a nice day," she said. Collecting the coins and her water, she tucked the receipt the register had spat out into the side pocket of her canvas bag. It was an automatic gesture, the result of years of filing expense reports for every minor purchase. Document everything. It was a rule to live by. She turned and walked out, the little bell marking her exit. The heat of the sun felt good. She took a long drink from the bottle. She had taken maybe 10 steps down the sidewalk when the bell tinkled again behind her. "Hey, you!" She stopped but didn't turn around immediately. She closed her eyes for a single, measured second. She had learned a long time ago that the first moments of a confrontation were about controlling the tempo. His tempo was aggressive, accusatory. Hers would be calm. She turned slowly, her body relaxed, her hands visible. He was already halfway to her, his face flushed, a vein pulsing in his temple. "What else did you put in that bag?" Imani held his gaze. "I bought a bottle of water." "I saw you in the back," he spat, his voice rising, playing to the street. "Saw you stuffing your bag." This was a lie. She had done no such thing. Her bag had been slung over her shoulder the entire time. That was the first thing she processed. Not the accusation, the lie. It was a deliberate fabrication, designed for an audience. "My bag was on my shoulder," she stated simply. "A fact, nothing more. I want to see what's in it." He was closer now, invading her personal space, his voice a low growl. He was performing authority, a man used to getting his way through sheer volume and intimidation. "You have no right to see what's in my bag," she said, her tone unchanged. It was not a challenge. It was a statement of law. His face tightened. The casual contempt curdled into something uglier. He saw a black woman alone, and he had made an assumption. He had assumed she was an easy target. He had assumed she would be flustered, scared, compliant. He was wrong. "You people are all the same," he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. And then he reached out and grabbed the strap of her bag. A hard, proprietary tug. The world seemed to slow down. The fabric of the strap dug into her shoulder. The weight of his hand was a violation. In that instant, she was no longer Imani Wallace, daughter of Judge Wallace, on a quiet leave. She was Agent Wallace, and this man had just laid hands on her. It was assault. "Show me the receipt," he demanded, his voice now loud and booming for everyone on the street to hear. Imani looked at his hand on her bag. She looked at his face, contorted with a petty, self-righteous fury. She felt the familiar cold click in her mind, the switch from person to professional. She let out a slow, controlled breath. She was counting, not in anger, in preparation. And as she looked at him, she made a decision. He wanted a receipt. She would give him one. It just wouldn't be the one he was expecting. A much larger bill was about to come due. On the periphery of her vision, a teenager in a bright yellow hoodie lifted her phone. The red dot of the recording light was a small, steady beacon. Good, Imani thought. A witness. Let the record show everything. The weight of Renshaw's hand on her bag was a declaration. It was an anchor point around which the next several weeks of her life would pivot. Imani's training, honed over 2 decades of facing down men with far more power and far deadlier intentions, took over. Rule 1. De-escalate the physical, assert the verbal. She did not pull back. To resist physically would give him the pretext he craved. It would turn his assault into a struggle, a he said, she said, for the inevitable arrival of local law enforcement. Instead, she let the bag hang limp between them, a contested object. She made her own hands visible, holding the water bottle loosely in one, the other open at her side. "Sir," she began, her voice a study in calm precision, "you are committing a crime. You are illegally detaining me, and you have just assaulted me. I am asking you to remove your hand from my property." The word crime seemed to enrage him further. His grip tightened. "Crime? You're the one stealing from my store. I'm making a citizen's arrest." "On what grounds?" she asked. The question was sharp, a lawyer's probe. "What did you personally witness me place in my bag?" He sputtered, his eyes darting around, realizing he was on shakier ground than his bluster suggested. "I saw you. Back by the coolers. You were acting suspicious." "What specific action was suspicious?" she pressed, keeping her voice level. "Describe it." He couldn't, because it didn't happen. His entire case was built on a feeling, a prejudice given voice. A young woman, a teenager with bright pink streaks in her hair and a phone held unwaveringly steady, stepped a little closer. Her name was Maya, though Imani wouldn't learn that for another hour. She was the witness. She was recording not just the confrontation, but Renshaw's inability to articulate a factual basis for his accusation. "That's it," he snarled, pulling a phone from his own pocket with his free hand. "I'm calling the cops. We'll see who's right." He stabbed at the screen, his thumb clumsy with rage. "That is your right," Imani said. "I will wait for them to arrive." She stood there, a statue of composure on a sunny sidewalk, tethered to this angry, red-faced man by the strap of her canvas bag. The silence that followed lasted about 47 seconds. She counted them. Each tick was a moment for him to reconsider, to let go, to walk back from the cliff. He did not. He held on, as if letting go would be an admission of defeat. He had committed himself to this path, and his pride would not let him retreat. The distant wail of a siren began to grow, cutting through the afternoon quiet. Renshaw smiled, a thin, triumphant smirk. His backup was coming. He believed the arrival of a uniform would validate his actions. Imani knew it would only escalate the number of laws being broken. 2 Northwood Police Department cruisers pulled up, lights flashing, but sirens dying with a final yelp. 2 officers emerged. The first was older, thick-set, with a swagger that spoke of long-held, unchallenged authority. His name tag read, Davis. This was Sergeant Davis. The second was younger, leaner, his movements hesitant. He looked barely out of the academy. His name tag read, Miller. This was the insider, though at that moment he was just a rookie cop looking deeply uncomfortable. Davis took in the scene with a glance. The angry local business owner, the calm black woman, the small crowd of onlookers. He'd seen this play before. He knew his lines. "What's the problem here, Mark?" Davis asked, addressing Renshaw with the familiar ease. He completely ignored Imani. "She was stealing from me, Dave," Renshaw said, his voice full of righteous injury. "Stuffed her bag full of stuff and walked right out. I stopped her, and she started giving me lip." Davis turned his attention to Imani for the first time. His eyes raked over her, from her running shoes to the silver locket at her throat. It was a look of instant dismissal. "Is that right?" he asked, his tone dripping with bored condescension. "No, officer, it is not," Imani said clearly. "I purchased a bottle of water. This man followed me out of the store, accused me of theft without cause, and when I refused to let him search my bag, he grabbed it and has been holding me here against my will." Davis sighed, a performative display of exasperation. "Ma'am, we get calls like this all the time. If you didn't take anything, you've got nothing to hide. Just show us what's in the bag, and we can all get on with our day." "With all due respect, officer, that's not how the Fourth Amendment works," Imani replied. "You have no probable cause to search my property. This man's vague and unsubstantiated accusation does not meet that legal standard." The mention of the Fourth Amendment seemed to irritate Davis. It was like she was speaking a foreign language he didn't care to understand. "Are you a lawyer?" he sneered. "I am a citizen who knows her rights," she said. That was a mistake, not a legal one, but a tactical one in this specific context. She had challenged his authority directly. She saw something move behind his eyes. The casual disdain hardened into active hostility. "All right, that's enough," Davis said, stepping forward. He was a big man, and he used his size to crowd her, to intimidate. It was a classic police tactic. "You're obstructing our investigation. Give me the bag." He didn't wait for a response. He reached out and snatched the bag from her shoulder, his force finally breaking Renshaw's grip. The movement was rough, almost violent. The bag's contents spilled onto the hot sidewalk. A paperback novel, a small notebook and pen, a tube of sunscreen, her wallet, and the receipt from Renshaw's provisions, a flimsy piece of paper that fluttered in the slight breeze. Officer Miller, the rookie, bent down and picked it up. He looked at it, then at the water bottle still in Imani's hand. He looked at Renshaw, then at his superior officer. His face was a mask of dawning realization and dismay. "Sarge," Miller said quietly, holding up the receipt. "She paid. It's right here. 1 bottle of water. Timestamp 3 minutes before the call." The air went still. The evidence of her innocence lay there on the concrete for everyone to see. The crowd murmured. Maya's phone remained steady, capturing the entire unjust tableau. For a moment, Sergeant Davis looked nonplussed. He had expected a confrontation, a confession, a reason to put her in cuffs. He had not expected a receipt, but the machine of institutional protection was already cranking. He couldn't be wrong, therefore she had to be. "So you paid for the water," Davis said, his voice recovering its sneer. "Doesn't mean you didn't take something else. Maybe you got spooked and ditched it." He gestured vaguely at the bushes lining the sidewalk. Renshaw, seeing his ally, doubled down. "Yeah, that's it. She must have dumped it." It was absurd. It was a fantasy constructed in real time to avoid the simple truth. They had been wrong. Terribly, publicly wrong. "There's nothing here," Miller said, after glancing in the bushes. He looked at Davis, his expression pleading. "Let it go." Davis ignored him. He wasn't finished. He couldn't just walk away. His authority had been questioned. He needed to reassert it, to have the last word. He picked up her wallet from the ground, flipping it open. An invasion of privacy that was now bordering on harassment. "Imani Wallace," he read from her driver's license. He looked at her address. "You're not from around here." It was another accusation. Outsider. Troublemaker. "I'm visiting my father," she said, her jaw tight. Davis tossed the wallet back onto the pile of her belongings. "Well, Miss Wallace, I'm going to give you a break today." He was framing the lack of evidence as an act of his own mercy. "But I'm citing you for loitering. You caused a public disturbance." It was a final petty twist of the knife. A charge so baseless it was laughable, yet it would still create a record. It was a way to mark her, to ensure the official report showed her as the problem. He scribbled on a pad, tore off the citation, and held it out to her. "You can fight it in court if you want. Now, I suggest you collect your things and move along." Imani looked at the citation. She looked at the faces of the two officers, one smug and triumphant, the other ashamed and avoidant. She looked at Renshaw, who was back by his door, arms crossed, the victor in his small, squalid kingdom. She didn't take the paper. She knelt down, her movements slow and deliberate. She carefully placed her book, her notebook, her sunscreen, and her wallet back into her bag. She left the citation lying on the sidewalk. She stood up, her dignity a shield that none of them could penetrate. She looked directly at Sergeant Davis. "You will regret this," she said. It was not a threat. It was colder than a threat. It was a statement of fact, a promise. Then she turned and walked away, not looking back. She did not run. She did not hurry. Her pace was measured, her back straight. Each step was a testament to her control. But inside, a fire had been lit. A cold, clean, purifying fire. 20 days of leave remaining. It was more than enough time. The hunt had begun. The 2-mile walk back to her father's house was a study in controlled fury. Imani felt the humiliation the way a person feels a phantom limb, an ache where something essential had been amputated. Her privacy, her presumption of innocence, her right to simply exist in public space without being seen as a threat. She did not allow the tears to come. Not yet. Emotion was a current. It could be channeled or it could drown you. She had work to do first. She counted her steps. 1,472 from the edge of town to the start of the gravel driveway. The crunch of the stones under her feet was a grounding sound. She focused on it, on the rhythm of her own breathing, pushing the image of Sergeant Davis's sneering face from her mind. Discipline was a muscle. When she walked into the kitchen, her father was sitting at the table reading a book. He looked up and his placid expression dissolved. He was a retired judge. He had spent a lifetime reading people, and he could read his daughter's face like a legal brief. He saw the tightly coiled anger, the rigid set of her jaw, the profound hurt she was trying to mask with composure. He didn't ask what happened. He had seen this look on her face before, in smaller ways, over the years. The time a teacher accused her of plagiarism on a brilliant history paper. The time a store clerk followed her through a department store. He knew the anatomy of 1,000 petty cuts. He simply closed his book, stood up, and took the kettle from the stove. "Tea," he said. It was not a question. It was a prescription. He moved around the kitchen, his motions calm and deliberate. He took down 2 mugs, a tin of chamomile, a jar of local honey. He did not pry. He created a space for her to speak when she was ready. This was his gift. He was her family anchor, the unmovable point in her often turbulent world. She stood at the sink and washed her face, the cool water a balm on her hot skin. She looked at her reflection in the window above the sink, now a dark mirror in the afternoon light. She saw the tension in her own eyes. She took a deep breath. She had a ritual for this. She had developed it during her first year as a field agent, a way to process the emotional fallout of her work without letting it consume her. She allowed herself exactly 10 minutes. For 10 minutes, she would let the feelings wash over her. The rage, the shame, the bone-deep weariness of having to navigate a world that so often saw her color before her character. She leaned against the counter and let it come. The fury was a white-hot spike behind her sternum. The humiliation was a cold stone in her stomach. She felt the sting of tears and let 2 of them trace paths down her cheeks. She did not sob. She just let the pressure vent, silently, for a precisely measured duration. 600 seconds. When the 10 minutes were up, she took another deep, cleansing breath. She wiped her face. The storm had passed. Now, the cold, clear sky of strategic intelligence remained. The emotion had been felt, acknowledged, and now it would be converted into fuel. Her father placed a steaming mug of tea in front of her at the table. She wrapped her hands around it, the warmth a welcome contrast to the cold resolve solidifying within her. "They wrote me a citation for loitering," she said, her voice devoid of its earlier tremor. It was flat, analytical. Her father sat opposite her. He nodded slowly. "Renshaw's store." Imani looked up, surprised. "You know him?" "I know of him," her father corrected. "Our town has its share of bitter men who mistake their prejudices for principles. Mark Renshaw is one of them, and he is enabled by men like Sergeant Davis." He said the name without inflection, but Imani could feel the weight of history behind it. Her father had been a judge in this county for 30 years. He knew the players, he knew the systems. There was a witness, Imani said. A young woman. She recorded the entire thing on her phone. Good, he said. Evidence is the great equalizer. I need to find her, Imani said. I need her to hold on to that video and not post it online. A viral video would create outrage, but it would also give the other side time to craft a narrative, to muddy the waters. Justice required precision, not just volume. What was her name? I don't know. Teenager, pink streaks in her hair, a yellow hoodie. Her father stood and walked to the phone on the wall, an old rotary model he refused to replace. He dialed a number from memory. Martha, he said into the receiver, it's Robert Wallace. I hope I'm not disturbing you. I'm well, thank you. Listen, I have a strange question. My daughter had an unpleasant encounter in town today. There was a young lady who may have witnessed it. Teenager, very distinctive pink highlights in her hair. He listened for a moment. Maya Jenkins. Of course. Her grandmother is in your book club. Yes, that would be wonderful. Thank you, Martha. He hung up. Maya Jenkins? Her grandmother lives 2 roads over. Martha is calling her now to get a cell number. The efficiency of small-town networks. While the town's official systems were corrupt, its informal ones, the webs of community and connection, were powerful. The phone rang a few minutes later. Her father answered, wrote down a number on a notepad, and pushed it across the table to Imani. Her grandmother says Maya was very upset by what she saw. She'll be expecting your call. Imani dialed the number. A hesitant hello answered on the other end. Maya, my name is Imani Wallace. I was the woman at the store today. I know, the girl said, her voice quiet but steady. I have it all on video. It was completely wrong what they did. Thank you for recording it, Maya. That took courage, the Imani said. I have a very important favor to ask you. Can you hold on to that video for me? Please don't share it or post it anywhere just yet. It is a critical piece of evidence, and we need to control when and how it's used. Can I trust you with that? There was a pause. Yeah, Maya said, her voice firming up. Yeah, you can trust me. My grandma says your dad is Judge Wallace. She says he's a good man. If you're his daughter, I trust you. Thank you, Maya. I will be in touch very soon. She hung up, a crucial piece now secured. She looked at her father. It's not enough. A civil rights complaint will go to internal affairs. Davis will investigate himself, find himself innocent, and it will be buried. I know, her father said. He stood up and walked into his study. The room was lined floor to ceiling with law books. It smelled of old paper and leather. He went to a large oak filing cabinet in the corner, a piece of furniture Imani had never paid much attention to. He unlocked the bottom drawer with a small brass key. He pulled out a single, thick file folder, then another, and another. He stacked them on his desk. There were at least a dozen of them, neatly labeled. Each label bore a name, followed by a date. What is this? Imani asked. This, her father said, his hand resting on the stack, is the box of evidence. Unofficially, of course. He opened the top file. It was labeled Renshaw, M. Inside were dozens of pages of handwritten notes on legal pads, newspaper clippings, and what looked like notarized affidavits. For the last 10 years, her father began, his voice low and heavy. Since I retired, I've made it a point to listen. People in this community, especially people of color, didn't always feel they could get a fair hearing at the courthouse or the police station. So they came here, to my home. They told me their stories. He tapped the file. This is a complaint from a family who was accused by Renshaw of shoplifting diapers. This is from a young man who was detained by Sergeant Davis for looking suspicious while waiting for a bus outside Renshaw's store. This is from a woman who was harassed and followed home. Each time, a complaint was filed. Each time, it was dismissed. Unfounded. Lack of evidence. Business owner's prerogative. He looked at Imani, his eyes burning with a righteous, long-simmering anger. I documented it all. I took their statements. I had them notarized. I told them to be patient. I told them that one day there would be a case so clear, so undeniable, that it would force the entire rotten structure into the light. A case that couldn't be swept away. He placed his hand on her shoulder. His touch was firm, grounding. Imani, he said, his voice thick with a profound gravity. I believe you are that case. The air in the study was thick with the weight of years of unspoken injustice. The files on her father's desk were not just paper. They were a chorus of silenced voices, a testament to a community's long-suffering patience. Imani felt a shift inside her. This was no longer just about her own humiliation. It was about the name in every one of those folders. It was about the system that had failed them all. 19 days of leave remaining. The countdown had begun. Her father's study became their war room. The large mahogany desk, usually home to his correspondence and chess set, was cleared to make way for the files. They spread them out, creating a timeline of malice that stretched back over a decade. Her father's methodical, judicial mind had created an impeccable paper trail. Each incident report he had helped someone file, each dismissed complaint, each notarized story of harassment was a single brick. Her job now was to use those bricks to build a prison. "We need more than a pattern of behavior," Imani said, her voice crisp. She was in her element now. This was what she did. She found the weak point in a complex criminal organization and applied pressure until it shattered. A pattern gets a civil suit, maybe an internal affairs review that goes nowhere. To bring federal charges, we need to prove conspiracy. We need to connect the dots between Renshaw, the police department, and a motive beyond simple bigotry. Her father nodded, his eyes sharp. The motive is always money, or power, which is just money waiting to be spent. Imani's first official act was a phone call. She didn't use her personal cell. She went to her car and retrieved her encrypted DEA-issued device. She had to handle this by the book. She was now a witness and a victim in a potential federal case, but she was also an agent. The lines had to be clear. She dialed the number for her direct superior, Special Agent in Charge, David Thompson. He was a no-nonsense, 25-year veteran of the agency who had been her mentor since she was a rookie. He picked up on the second ring. "Wallace," he said, his voice a familiar baritone, "I thought you were on a beach somewhere, forgetting my name." "Not exactly, Dave," she said. "I need to report a crime." There was a pause. The easy tone vanished from his voice, replaced by the focused attention of a commander. "Go ahead." Imani recounted the events of the afternoon. She was meticulous, objective, using the dispassionate language of an incident report. She described Renshaw's accusation, the physical assault, the arrival of officers Davis and Miller, the illegal search, the discovery of the receipt, and the final punitive citation for loitering. She left out the emotion. She reported only the facts. When she was finished, the line was silent for a moment. Thompson let out a long, slow breath. "They illegally searched a federal officer and filed a fraudulent citation? On a baseless stop?" "Yes," Imani confirmed. "And based on preliminary information, it's part of a larger pattern of targeted harassment against minority citizens, enabled by this police department." "Where are you?" Thompson asked. "Northwood, just south of the state line." "I know it," he said, and the way he said it told her he knew its reputation. "What do you need, Imani? A team from Civil Rights Division? U.S. Marshals to serve a warrant on your friend, the shopkeeper?" "Not yet," she said. "That's too loud. It'll send them scattering. I think this is bigger than a simple civil rights case. I think it's a criminal conspiracy. I need access. I want to pull the official report filed by Sergeant Davis. I want to run background on him, Renshaw, and the police chief. I want to see this town's financials." She was asking for the keys to the kingdom. She was asking him to deploy the formidable resources of the Department of Justice based on a $2 bottle of water and a bogus loitering ticket. "You got it," Thompson said without hesitation. His trust in her was absolute, forged over years of dangerous operations where they had relied on each other's judgment for their very survival. "I'll create a preliminary file. Case number will be sent to your device. Everything you need, you requisition through that. You are the lead investigator until I tell you otherwise. But Imani, be careful. Small town corruption can be more dangerous than any cartel. They're fighting for their whole world." "I know," she said. "Thank you, Dave." "Don't thank me. Just nail them to the wall." She hung up, a surge of cold purpose running through her. The machine was now in motion. Within an hour, a secure digital file appeared on her device. It contained the Northwood Police Department's incident report for her loitering citation, filed by Sergeant Davis. She and her father read it together on her laptop screen. It was a work of fiction. The report stated that police were called to a disturbance where a transient female was aggressively confronting a local business owner. It claimed she had refused to identify herself, acted erratically, and that a consensual search of her bag was conducted to ensure public safety. It mentioned the receipt for the water, but framed it as a potential tactic to cover for the theft of other goods. The loitering citation was justified by her refusal to leave the area and continued belligerence. It was signed by Davis and co-signed by Officer Miller. He made Miller sign it, Imani said, her voice tight. The kid knew it was a lie, but Davis forced his hand. A classic move, her father murmured. It makes the rookie complicit. It binds him to the lie. It also makes him a witness to the fabrication of a police report, Imani countered. That's a felony. And since it was filed in relation to an incident involving a federal officer engaged in interstate travel, it's a federal felony. It gives us leverage. She saved a copy of the report to a secured drive. This was the cornerstone of her case. The lie. Everything would be built upon it. Next, she ran the names. Mark Renshaw. He had 2 prior misdemeanor arrests for assault, both stemming from confrontations outside his store, both dismissed. He owned his building outright, but had 3 liens against the property from a developer, Northwood Valley Estates, LLC. Sergeant David Davis, 17 years on the force, a dozen civilian complaints for excessive force and racial profiling, all of them unfounded. His finances showed a man living well beyond the salary of a small-town police sergeant. A new boat, 2 late model cars, vacations to the Caribbean. Police Chief Brian Carmichael, the man in charge, appointed 5 years ago. Before that, he was head of security for a real estate development firm. The name of the firm was Northwood Valley Estates, LLC. The breath caught in Imani's throat. "Papa," she said, turning the laptop to her father. "Look at this." He leaned in, his glasses perched on his nose. He read the screen, his expression grim. Well, he said softly. "There's the money. Northwood Valley Estates, LLC. The name was the link. It was the thread that connected the shopkeeper, the police sergeant, and the chief. They're trying to drive property values down, Imani thought aloud, the pieces clicking into place. Renshaw harasses people, creates a perception that the downtown area is unsafe, that crime is rampant. Davis and the PD back him up, making it official. People get scared. Businesses suffer. They sell cheap. And Northwood Valley Estates is there to buy it all up for pennies on the dollar," her father finished, his voice like ice. "They're not just enabling a bigot, they're using him as a tool to gut the town for profit. This wasn't just a case of racism. It was a RICO case, racketeering, a criminal enterprise operating under the color of law and local business. It was the exact kind of systemic corruption the DEA's task forces were designed to dismantle." She looked at the countdown on her mental clock. 18 days of leave remaining. "They thought I was just some woman," she whispered, a cold smile touching her lips for the first time. "They have no idea what's coming." The quiet before the storm was over. Now the wind was beginning to howl. The Wallace home, once a sanctuary of quiet reflection, transformed into the nerve center of a covert federal investigation. Light quality became a marker of their progress. The soft, hazy light of morning was for strategy sessions over coffee. The bright, direct light of midday was for deep dives into digital records and financial statements. The long golden shadows of late afternoon were for synthesizing the day's findings. 17 days of leave remaining. Imani had established the what, a conspiracy to depress property values through racially motivated harassment. Now she needed the how and the who in irrefutable detail. She needed to map the machine. She and her father spent 2 full days immersed in his box of evidence. It was a heartbreaking archive of systemic abuse. They took his handwritten notes and cross-referenced them with the official records Imani was now able to pull. A clear, damning pattern emerged. Over 80% of Renshaw's shoplifting accusations targeted black or Hispanic individuals. In every single case where Sergeant Davis was the responding officer, the complaint was either upheld with a citation or the victim was let go with a warning, while the official report painted them as the aggressor. In a handful of cases involving a white person, the matter was dismissed at the scene with no report filed. "It's statistical proof of biased policing," Imani said, highlighting a spreadsheet she had created. The numbers don't lie, but a defense attorney will say it's circumstantial. We need a human source. We need someone from inside their circle. Officer Miller, her father said, the rookie, you said he looked ashamed? He was, Imani agreed. He knew it was wrong, but he still signed that false report. He's compromised. Or he's trapped, her father countered. A new officer in a corrupt department has two choices: go along to get along or become a pariah. He might be looking for a third option. Imani knew he was right. She had seen it before. Young, idealistic officers caught in toxic systems, desperate for a way out that didn't involve ending their careers. She had to create that third option for Miller. She couldn't approach him directly. It was too risky. If he reported her, her entire undercover operation within the town would be blown. She had to make it possible for him to come to her. She created a new anonymous email address through a secure portal provided by the DEA. Then, using a public computer at a library in the next county, she sent a single, untraceable email to the general inbox of the Northwood Police Department. The email had no subject line. The body contained only 2 sentences. The report on the Wallace incident was false. If you want to do the right thing, create a new email account and send a message to this address: Justice for Northwood at secure.proton.me. It was a shot in the dark, a breadcrumb left in the forest. She didn't know if Miller would see it or if he would have the courage to act if he did. Now, all she could do was wait. While she waited, she dug deeper into Northwood Valley Estates, LLC. It was a ghost corporation, registered through a firm in Delaware notorious for shell companies, but Imani had the full power of the federal government at her fingertips. She submitted a request through the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN. It was a high-level request, authorized by S.A.C. Thompson, to pierce the corporate veil. 2 days later, 15 days of leave remaining, the answer came back. The sole owner and beneficiary of Northwood Valley Estates was a man named Arthur Vance. Imani's blood ran cold. Arthur Vance was not just some developer. He was the head of the Northwood Town Council, the most powerful politician in the county, the systemic enabler. Papa, she called, her voice strained. Her father came into the study, a plate of sandwiches in his hand. He saw her face and set the plate down. What is it? The developer, she said. The one trying to buy up all the property. It's Arthur Vance. Her father sank into a chair, the color draining from his face. Vance, he breathed. Of course. He's been talking about revitalizing the downtown for years, pushing for eminent domain, claiming the area is blighted. He's not just claiming it's blighted, Imani said. The pieces locking into place with sickening precision. He's creating the blight. He's paying Renshaw to be his attack dog through the property liens. He has the police chief in his pocket from their old job together. And Davis is his enforcer on the street. It's a closed loop. They manufacture the crime statistics to justify the political action that allows Vance to acquire the property at a fraction of its worth. It was a perfect self-sustaining machine of corruption. And she had, by sheer chance, walked right into its gears. That evening, as she was about to log off for the day, a notification popped up. A new email from an address she didn't recognize. rookie.cop.123@gmail.com. Her heart hammered in her chest. The message was short. I saw your email. I was there. It was a lie. I don't know who you are, but I know what they're doing is wrong. I can't talk. They watch us, but I can get things. It was Miller. He had taken the bait. He had chosen the third option. Imani typed back a careful reply. Thank you for your courage. Do not put yourself at risk. There is a drop point. The hollowed-out book in the local history section of the county library. The title is A History of Northwood County. Place whatever you find inside. I will check it once a day. She had created a dead drop, a classic espionage technique. It was safe, anonymous, and untraceable. The next day, 14 days of leave remaining, she drove to the county library. Her hands were sweating slightly as she walked to the local history section. The book was there, a thick, dusty tome. She pulled it from the shelf, her fingers trembling almost imperceptibly. She carried it to a secluded carrel and opened it. Inside, nestled in a hollowed-out cavity, was a USB flash drive. She didn't plug it into her own laptop. That was a rookie mistake. It could be loaded with malware, a tracking device. She drove to a DEA field office 2 hours away, a place where she was an anonymous face, and gave the drive to a tech agent for forensic analysis in a secure, isolated environment. "Scan it, clone it, and let me know what's on it," she said. An hour later, the tech agent came back, his eyes wide. "You're not going to believe this," he said. He led her to a terminal. On the screen was the contents of the drive. Miller hadn't just given her documents. He had given her the entire conspiracy. There were copies of text messages between Chief Carmichael and Arthur Vance, discussing softening up the downtown area. There were emails from Davis to Renshaw, telling him to keep an eye out for more of our friends, and promising that Carmichael sends his regards. But the crown jewel was a secret audio recording. Miller had apparently started carrying a micro recorder after the incident with Imani. The audio file was labeled Davis_bragging. She clicked play. Sergeant Davis's voice filled the small room, tinny but clear. He was talking to another officer in the station's locker room. Yeah, some lawyer type from out of town," Davis was saying, chuckling. "Started quoting the Constitution at me, so I wrote her a ticket for breathing too loud. Renshaw was happy, Vance was happy, and I got a nice little bonus in my account this morning. Easy money." Imani felt a chill go down her spine. It was a confession to taking a bribe from Vance's company, a bribe directly connected to her own harassment. It was the linchpin. It connected the street-level thuggery to the high-level corruption with a direct financial transaction. It was a RICO charge, gift-wrapped. She looked at the calendar in her mind. 13 days of leave remaining. It was time to stop gathering evidence. It was time to start issuing warrants. The counterattack was about to become very, very public. The drive back from the DEA field office was different from all the drives that had preceded it. The tension of the unknown was gone, replaced by the focused certainty of the endgame. Imani drove not with anxiety, but with the calm, methodical precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. She had the diagnosis. She had the tools. Now came the excision. 10 days of leave remaining. She spent the next 3 days not in her father's study, but in a sterile conference room at the U.S. Attorney's office in the state capital, 100 miles from Northwood's corrupt ecosystem. The transition from field investigator to lead witness was seamless. She sat across from an assistant U.S. attorney named Elena Ramirez, a sharp, indefatigable prosecutor in her late 30s who specialized in public corruption cases. S.A.C. Thompson was there for the first meeting, a silent, imposing presence that communicated the full weight of the DEA's institutional backing. Imani laid out the case with the dispassionate clarity she was known for. She didn't begin with her own story. She began with the machine. Arthur Vance, head of the Northwood Town Council, is using a shell company, Northwood Valley Estates, to systematically acquire downtown properties at depressed values, she stated, pointing to a flowchart she had sketched on a whiteboard. The mechanism for this depression is a manufactured crime wave, orchestrated by Police Chief Brian Carmichael and executed by Sergeant David Davis and a local merchant, Mark Renshaw. She then walked Ramirez through the evidence. Her father's meticulously compiled box of evidence, establishing the decade-long pattern of harassment, the town's own biased policing statistics, the property record showing Renshaw's financial entanglement with Vance, the financial analysis of Davis's unexplainable wealth, Chief Carmichael's previous employment under Vance, and finally, the evidence from Officer Miller's flash drive, the text messages, the emails, and the audio recording of Sergeant Davis confessing to taking a bribe in exchange for harassing her. Ramirez listened without interruption, her eyes narrowed in concentration. When Imani finished, the prosecutor was silent for a full minute, her gaze fixed on the whiteboard. "It's a textbook RICO case," Ramirez said finally, her voice humming with a prosecutor's excitement. "Conspiracy to interfere with commerce by extortion. Wire fraud, given the electronic transfer of the bribe. Deprivation of rights under color of law. This is airtight, Agent Wallace." "I agree," Imani said. "This Officer Miller," Ramirez asked. "His testimony is crucial, and he's put himself at immense risk. He's agreed to testify before a grand jury in exchange for federal protection and immunity," Imani confirmed. S.A.C. Thompson is handling the arrangements. He'll be extracted from Northwood and placed in protective custody the day before the warrants are served. For the next 2 days, Imani and Ramirez worked to assemble the grand jury presentation. Imani's role was to distill the complex web of corruption into a clear, linear narrative. She prepared her testimony, rehearsing it not for emotion, but for unassailable fact. She was the central pillar of the case, the federal officer whose routine encounter had exposed the entire rotten framework. On the third day, she stood before a secret federal grand jury. In the anonymous wood-paneled room, she told the story. She spoke of the walk into town, the purchase of the water, the confrontation with Renshaw. She described the arrival of the police, the illegal search, the contemptuous dismissal of the receipt, and the fraudulent citation. She spoke with the same unshakable composure she had displayed on that sidewalk. Her voice never wavered. Then Ramirez played the audio recording of Sergeant Davis. The jurors leaned forward, listening to the tinny sound of a man boasting about his corruption, laughing about violating the rights of a citizen for easy money. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a collective, quiet outrage. It took the grand jury less than an hour to return a true bill, handing down indictments for Mark Renshaw, Sergeant David Davis, Police Chief Brian Carmichael, and Arthur Vance. The charges included racketeering, conspiracy, wire fraud, and multiple civil rights violations. The warrants were sealed. The clock was now ticking towards the final act. 5 days of leave remaining. The operational plan for the arrest was drafted with military precision. It would be a multi-agency effort led by the U.S. Marshal Service, with tactical support from the FBI's regional SWAT team and logistical support from the DEA. S.A.C. Thompson would be on the ground as the coordinating federal officer. Crucially, no local or state police would be notified. The Northwood Police Department was not a partner, it was a target. The raid was scheduled for 0800 hours. 3 days from now. Imani returned to her father's house. The war room was quiet, the files now boxed up as official evidence. The waiting was the hardest part. She had done her job. The machine of federal justice was now moving on its own momentum. "It's out of my hands now," she told her father as they sat on the porch, watching the evening fireflies begin to dot the twilight. "You did the work, Imani," he said, placing his hand over hers. "You took their stories." He gestured back towards the house, towards the ghost of the evidence boxes. "And you made them heard. You honored them." The night before the raid, she couldn't sleep. She sat in the dark kitchen, the silver locket cool against her skin. She thought about Renshaw's face, twisted with petty rage. She thought about Davis's smirk, Vance's political ambition. They had built an empire on the humiliation of others. They thought their power was absolute. They had learned a long time ago that in their small town, they were the law. They had never accounted for someone like her, someone with the patience to gather the facts, the training to build the case, and the authority to bring the full weight of the United States government down upon them. 2 days of leave remaining. The morning of the raid broke clear and cool. A perfect autumn day. Imani was up before dawn, drinking coffee at the kitchen window, just as she had on the first day of her leave. But the silence was different now. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the charged, humming silence before a lightning strike. She had asked for one thing. She wanted to be there, not to participate, but to witness. Thompson had argued against it, but she had been firm. "I started this," she had said. "I will see it through." He had finally, reluctantly agreed. She would ride with him in an unmarked vehicle as an observer. At 07:45 hours, a black Suburban with government plates rolled silently up the gravel driveway. S.A.C. Thompson stepped out. He was dressed in a tactical vest over a crisp shirt. He looked at Imani and gave a single sharp nod. It was time. She kissed her father goodbye. "I'll be back this afternoon," she said. "I know," he said, his eyes shining with pride. "Go finish it." They drove into Northwood, part of a silent convoy of dark vehicles that converged on the town from 3 different directions. The town was just waking up. People were getting coffee, heading to work, completely unaware that their world was about to be irrevocably changed. At precisely 800 hours, the operation began. Team Alpha, led by a stern-faced U.S. Marshal, hit Renshaw's provisions. Imani and Thompson were parked directly across the street, the same vantage point from which Maya had filmed the initial confrontation. They watched as 4 agents in tactical vests swarmed the entrance. Renshaw was behind the counter, wiping it with a dirty rag. He looked up. saw the agents pouring in, and his face went slack with confusion, then fear. "Mark Renshaw?" The marshal's voice boomed, echoing in the small store. "You are under arrest by order of a federal grand jury." Renshaw began to bluster, the same aggressive indignation he had used on Imani. "On what charge?" "You have no right—" The marshal cut him off, his voice like cold steel. "You have the right to remain silent." They pulled his hands behind his back and cuffed him. The click of the handcuffs was audible even from across the street. They walked him out of his store, past the very spot on the sidewalk where he had grabbed her bag. His face was pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. The swagger was gone, replaced by the limp posture of a man whose power had just evaporated. Situational irony, Imani thought, the primary dramatic engine. He was being led away in restraints, a public spectacle, just as he had hoped she would be. Simultaneously, Team Bravo, a larger FBI contingent, descended on the Northwood Police Department. They didn't knock. They used a key card provided by Officer Miller, who had been extracted with his family the night before. They moved through the station with swift, silent efficiency. They found Chief Carmichael in his office, on the phone. They found Sergeant Davis in the break room, laughing with another officer. The arrests were swift and professional. "Chief Carmichael, you are under arrest." "Sergeant Davis, you are under arrest." Their badges and service weapons were taken from them. They were cuffed and led out through the front doors of the station they once commanded. Their officers stared in stunned silence, their faces a mixture of shock and, on a few faces, quiet relief. The bullies had finally been called to account. Team Charlie, meanwhile, had the most delicate target, Arthur Vance. They didn't raid his home. They waited for him to arrive at the town hall for a morning meeting. 2 FBI agents in sharp suits approached him as he stepped out of his luxury sedan. "Mr. Vance," one agent said politely, "we have a warrant for your arrest." Vance, the politician, tried to smile, to project calm. "There must be some mistake." "There is no mistake, sir," the agent replied, gently but firmly guiding him toward an unmarked car. "It's about Northwood Valley Estates." At the mention of the name, all the color drained from Vance's face. The mask of political charm fell away, revealing the raw fear beneath. He got into the car without another word. The kingpin had been dethroned. From her vantage point, Imani watched it all unfold on a network tablet showing the feeds from the different teams. Renshaw, Davis, Carmichael, Vance. One by one, the pillars of the corrupt machine were removed. Thompson turned to her, his face grim but satisfied. "It's done." Imani nodded, a long, slow breath escaping her lips. She felt not elation, not triumph. She felt the quiet, profound satisfaction of a promise kept, a promise to herself, to her father, and to every name in those old, weathered files. The reckoning was complete, but the work of justice was just beginning. The arrests sent a seismic shockwave through the quiet town of Northwood. By noon, the story was on every local news channel, and by evening, it was a national headline. "Federal raids dismantle corrupt town leadership," one Chiron read. "RICO charges filed against councilman, police chief." Imani remained in the shadows, her name conspicuously absent from the initial press releases. She was a federal officer who was the target of the initial incident, an anonymous catalyst. Her role was complete. The system she had set in motion would now see the process through. She spent the afternoon at her father's house, not watching the news, but helping him in the garden, pulling weeds from the rich, dark soil. It was grounding, tangible work. The dirt under her fingernails felt more real than the distant clamor of the media. Her father didn't say much. He just worked alongside her, their shared silence a comfortable acknowledgement of the day's momentous events. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, he finally spoke. "Your mother would have been so proud, Imani." A single tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "I know, Papa." The next day, one day of leave remaining, the U.S. Attorney, Elena Ramirez, held a press conference. Imani and her father watched it on the small television in his study. Ramirez stood at a podium, flanked by S.A.C. Thompson and the head of the regional FBI office. She was poised, professional, and radiating a confidence that came from holding an unbeatable hand. She laid out the case for the public, detailing the years-long conspiracy to defraud the citizens of Northwood. She spoke of a cancer of corruption that had infected the town's most trusted institutions. She described how Vance, Carmichael, and Davis had exploited their positions of power for personal enrichment, using Mark Renshaw as their street-level enforcer to create a climate of fear and intimidation. Then, she did something Imani hadn't expected. This entire conspiracy was uncovered thanks to the courage of two people, Ramirez announced. First, a young citizen of this town, Miss Maya Jenkins, who had the presence of mind to record the initial incident of harassment, providing prosecutors with irrefutable video evidence. On the screen, they showed a still from Maya's video, the moment Davis was snatching the bag from Imani's shoulder. Second, Ramirez continued, the bravery of an officer within the Northwood Police Department, Officer Daniel Miller, who risked his career and his safety to come forward as a whistleblower. Officer Miller provided internal communications and a key audio recording that blew this case wide open. He represents the integrity and honor that must be the future of law enforcement in this town. Imani smiled. Ramirez was protecting her, but more importantly, she was empowering the community. She was making heroes of the local citizens who had stood up to the corruption. Ramirez concluded by outlining the path forward. The Department of Justice would be filing a motion for a federal consent decree to oversee the complete reform of the Northwood Police Department. This would include new hiring practices, mandatory de-escalation and anti-bias training, and the creation of a civilian oversight board. Officer Miller, she announced, had been appointed as the interim chief of police, tasked with rebuilding the department from the ground up. Furthermore, the U.S. Attorney's Office was setting up a task force to investigate Northwood Valley Estates, with the goal of seizing its illegally acquired assets and creating a community land trust to return the properties to local ownership. The resolution was systemic. It wasn't just about punishing 4 guilty men. It was about dismantling the machine they had built and replacing it with something equitable and just. It was about ensuring this could never happen again. Later that day, Imani received a call from Maya Jenkins. I saw the press conference, the teenager said, her voice buzzing with excitement. They called me brave. You were brave, Maya, Imani said warmly. You were the first person to stand up. Never forget that. I won't, Maya said. My grandma's crying. She's so proud. And thank you for trusting me, for doing all this. Thank you for trusting me, Imani replied. Her final day of leave was quiet. Her work was done. The legal process would grind on for months, but the outcome was certain. Vance, Carmichael, Davis, and Renshaw had all been denied bail, deemed flight risks. Their empires had crumbled in a single morning. On that last day, Imani decided to take one final walk into town. She followed the same route, her strides calm and even. The air was crisp, the sun warm on her face. She walked down the main street past the familiar storefronts. But the atmosphere was different. The cloud of unspoken tension that had always seemed to hang over the town was gone. People were talking on the sidewalks, not in hushed tones, but in open, animated conversation. There was a lightness in the air, the feeling of a fever that had finally broken. She reached Renshaw's Provisions. The store was dark. A large official notice from the U.S. Marshal Service was taped to the glass door. Property of the U.S. government seized pending asset forfeiture. She stood there for a moment on the exact spot where he had confronted her. She looked at the notice on the door. She felt no gloating, no vengeful satisfaction. She felt only a profound, quiet peace, the kind of peace that comes from seeing a great wrong made right. She continued her walk, heading for a small cafe that had just opened. As she passed the police station, she saw a group of officers out front, watching the patrol cars. They were laughing. At the front of the group, sleeves rolled up, sponge in hand, was Interim Chief Daniel Miller. He saw her. Their eyes met across the street. He didn't wave or call out. He simply gave her a small, respectful nod. A nod of gratitude, of shared purpose. Imani nodded back, a gesture of acknowledgement. The department was in good hands. She spent her last hour in Northwood sitting in the sunny window of the cafe, a simple cup of coffee in her hands. She wasn't Agent Wallace anymore. She wasn't the lead investigator or the star witness. She was just Imani, a daughter visiting her father's town, a town that was, for the first time in a long time, truly hers as well. When she returned to the house, her bag was packed. Her father was waiting on the porch. He held out the small velvet box that had held the locket. "For your travels," he said. She smiled. "I'm already wearing it, Papa." He shook his head. No, for the other kind of travel. She opened the box. Inside, nestled on the velvet, was a single, shiny brass key. The key to the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet. The work isn't over, Imani, he said softly. There will always be other stories that need to be heard. I'm getting old. It's your cabinet now. She closed her hand around the key, its sharp edges pressing into her palm. It was heavier than any weapon she had ever carried. It was the weight of a legacy, the responsibility of being the keeper of the stories. She hugged him, a long, tight embrace. I love you, Papa. I love you, daughter. Go give him hell. She got in her car and started the engine. As she pulled down the long gravel driveway, she glanced in the rearview mirror. Her father stood on the porch, watching her go, a proud, unwavering sentinel. Around her neck, the locket felt warm against her skin. In her pocket, the key was a solid, reassuring weight. Her leave was over, but her real work, she knew, had just begun. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.